Today we are going to have a fun chat. So for everyone coming, and because this question comes up a lot, yes, we will be sending out the replay. But yes, you should still stay for the whole thing live because it's better. Everything's better live. But we will send out the replay to everyone after. Literally, it depends on how my kids' pickup schedule goes, if go out tonight or tomorrow morning. I know my thing's frozen, some the new Mac OS update, but I know you can still hear me. So basically, what we're going to do is we're going to have them come on in a minute. But just kind of how this came about is the three of us just happened to be at the same conference recently. And at the event, we were literally talking about this exact topic of home inspections and how the negotiations are around it. And as we were talking more about it, just kind of, in the lobby, kind of lobby conning side of the event, we realized pretty quick that this is something that people would be interested in. And I've always had a firm belief when it comes to doing fun things is just getting out of the way for smart people. So I figured you don't want to hear me talk about this. This is not my specialty. So I bring in smarter people than me on these topics, and we'll have them in. So we'd like to welcome Suze Cumming, who's our negotiation expert, and Karen Yolevski, the CEO of Carson Dunlop. So maybe just while we're kind of giving everyone in the chat, let us know where you're from. And I see a Newmarket, Ontario, because that's where I am right now. But if everyone in the chat, let us know where you are, and then maybe start with Karen, a little 60-second for those who don't know who you are.
Sounds great. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Suze, for doing this. We're going to have a fun hour together, everyone. My name is Karen Yolevski, and I'm the CEO of Carson Dunlop, which many of you know as one of Canada's preeminent home inspection firms. And if you don't know us, I encourage you to get to know us. This is a topic that's really exciting for me because we talk a lot from the perspective of why home inspections are good ideas, and what goes into a home inspection, right? Lots of you guys, we've done sessions on to talk about that, but this is really getting into how are you leveraging reports and how are you dealing with some of the outcomes of reports. So some real value added information to you as partners, to us in the industry, and we're really excited about that. So thanks for having me, and thanks for all of your support of Carson Dunlop. Suze, over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I hope my video is working okay. I didn't do my iPhone or my Apple update either. Yeah, it was amazing to meet Karen. It was right after I had written an article for REM about negotiating after the home inspection. I'd gotten so much feedback and conversations about that. And then there was Karen, and I was like, oh, let's talk. Like, what's it like from the inspector's point of view? And, here we are in this new environment where home inspections are happening a lot. And then they're causing a lot of havoc for agents, particularly agents who haven't been in a market where there's been a lot of home inspections. Yeah, so we had a pretty spirited and entertaining conversation, the three of us, and thought this would be a lot of fun. We don't have a script for today. We're going to go through some scenarios that Karen and I came up with, and I'm just going to try and bring that negotiation lens to it for a way for you guys to hopefully see it in a different light, and not find it something that's awkward and uncomfortable or something that you're worried about, because it's a pretty natural and normal part of a real estate transaction these days. So yeah, delighted to be here. Andrew, thank you for putting this together. You're always putting super valuable, cool stuff together. So thank you.
My pleasure. And how this is going to work for everyone in the chat. So if you have questions, you can put them in the chat just because of the speed that they go through. I can't promise we're going to see them. So there's also the Q&A function with a webinar. You can put questions in there. I'll pay attention to both, but I'm just going to go off camera and let them talk about it. But I'll pop in if it's one that would be very helpful at the time. So I'll just interrupt if I need to ask a question. Otherwise, I'll try and save them for maybe near the end. But I'm just going to go off camera and let you two run it. So thanks for coming and enjoy.
Let's see what happens.
That's great. So I'm going to tee us up. And then, as mentioned, Suze is going to walk us through. We're going to start with some broader information, who plays a part in these types of negotiations, where people are coming from, sort of that mental, emotional state of things, because that has a big impact, Suze, I know, on what you're going to talk about. And then we are going to walk through some fact-based scenarios. So some scenarios that maybe some in the audience have gone through, or anticipate going through. And then there'll be some wrap up and, of course, some time for questions. And we're always excited about the questions that come from the practitioners because you guys are the ones on the front line. So just to get us started, what is this not today? So this is not going to be a technical presentation about inspections. It's also not about pricing, although of course pricing and inspections sometimes have some interplay. This is about what happens after the inspection. So when there's emotions, when there's expectations, and when deals can sometimes come off the rails depending on what has come from that inspection or what has come from not getting an inspection earlier on. So most agents know that inspections matter. They help to create some certainty in the transaction, help keep clients happy. They help realtors get paid. It's really important as well. Uh, Typically, you'll see people will get a pre-listing inspection as part of initial due diligence so that you know what you're working with as a listing agent. It helps to limit some commentary around, you told me, right? That might sound familiar to some of you. You told me we could sell for X amount, or I assumed you knew about the condition of my house because you're the expert. You spent time getting us ready to go to market. You must have seen all derailers. So important to try to limit that as much as possible. And then on the buy side, inspections are going to help spare the realtor from the you should haves, right? The other thing that often comes up. A purchaser might raise something down the road. You should have known there were issues. You should have told me this could have been a problem. That's no fun, does not help with repeat and referral business, which still drives the lion's share of business in the industry. But the other piece of the puzzle is this, that agents are not trained as often in how to negotiate through what inspections create. And that's the crux of what we're here to talk about today. So that's why we wanted this to be a conversation with Suze, because this isn't about, knowledge about the house and the systems that run it, or even getting the inspection in the first place. But today is about helping agents to think more clearly, manage the emotions around transactions, and help to hold the transactions together professionally and ethically. So on that note, let's talk a little bit, Suze, about the human systems at play. Who is actually involved? What's actually happening when the inspection is done? It sounds like a two-party negotiation to the outside, right? Buyer or seller, but I know there's a number of stakeholders involved. So do you want to walk through for us who is involved and the negotiation dynamics that are at play between those stakeholders?
For sure. There's obviously the buyer and the seller and of course the agents. And I think we've all waited with bated breath for that call after the home inspection and wondering, what the home inspection turned up and what the buyer is going to respond and do with that home inspection. So agents, I think, can be incredibly tied up in that inspection report for a whole bunch of reasons. Obviously, our success at being able to get a transaction done, but also how our sellers are going to respond or our buyers, and what this situation of renegotiation might look like. So the agents are very involved, and then of course there's all the outside experts, right? The uncle who's the drywaller who's got an opinion, and the friends and the experts who can surround the transaction as well. So it's a pretty loaded moment, the inspection delivery, in many cases, and certainly not all. There was a time 40 years ago when I started in real estate where home inspections were just a tick box, and you either liked the house and closed and went ahead, or you didn't like the house and you walked away. And that, is certainly not the case now. It opens up this pretty lively, emotional, complex negotiation in many cases. So I thought let's have a conversation about what that looks like. I see in the audience a ton of people who have taken negotiation courses with me. So in a way, we'll be able to talk about how do we take those negotiation theories and apply them to this situation.
That's fantastic. So you leaned into something there that I talk about a lot, right? That inspection, they are not instructions, they are information. They are not pass-fail exams. They are moments in time that speak about the condition of a house. And no house is perfect, right? No one gets a perfect score on a home inspection. And if that's what you are getting out of reports, I might suggest that that isn't the best way of looking at these things because that's likely to be unrealistic when it comes to a home that a buyer is interested in or a seller is putting on the market. But once that inspection enters negotiation, there's a lot of pitfalls that could happen there. It can get misread, it can get overinterpreted, and it can be used as leverage. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. So Suze, those are some of the broader areas, but do you want to talk a little bit before we move into scenarios about some of the ways you see inspections being used that can create some misunderstandings or create some power dynamics between those stakeholders in a transaction?
For sure. I mean, I think they're a huge piece of information that is viewed in different ways by different people. Like you say, some people see it as a checklist or a pass or a fail. The inspector, of course, is just seeing it as this is what's going on with the house. That's it. It's simple. This is what's going on. The elements of the house, then what sort of condition they're in. And it's not meant to be something that says the house is good or the house is bad. But people take it as the house is good or the house is bad. I've heard agents say that their buyer thought it was a checklist of all the things the seller needed to do before the transaction could go forward. So obviously a lot of misinformation about what the purpose of the report is and how it works. The leverage thing is really significant, and I think that'll come up in our scenarios today. So as soon as there's a condition on home inspection, if it's worded really loosely, which so many of the inspections across Canada are, basically satisfactory home inspection. If it's worded like that, basically the power just all went to the buyer as soon as that condition came up, because when that home inspection comes out, the buyer can walk away, but the seller can't until that conditional period is over. So there's this power dynamic that's significant that buyers and buyers agents are sometimes using as leverage against the seller. So that's an important thing, and that's what is sometimes so emotionally annoying for agents. But let's get through that annoyance into understanding what it is. So yeah, misuse, power dynamics shift, and just seeing it different. I get agents who are angry at the inspector, and I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy. Like they're not making stuff up about the house, right? I mean, let's just for this conversation assume that the inspection report is relatively accurate, because I think inspectors are relatively accurate in my experience.
All right, fantastic. All right, well, got some context. We're going to move now into some real life scenarios. We'll call them real life because there are a number of people on this Zoom right now who certainly have experienced all of the scenarios we're going to go through. But let's start with one that I would say, to me at least, comes across as quite typical. And Susan, your take on this will be really interesting because you've seen a ton out there. So scenario one, we're calling this reasonable people, unreasonable pressure. So this is where there are some unexpected and some pretty significant deficiencies that might come up on an inspection report. So some examples, a roof, it's near end of life. Roofs are expensive, right? So people might take some pause when they see that the roof needs to be replaced. Let's say there are some failing skylights, right? Skylights prone to leaks. We've got a few in this home in our example. And then let's take a furnace that's at end of life. So we've got some things that sound like they're a bit on the older side, and there are going to be some dynamics at play when these big ticket expenses, because all of these things are relatively expensive to take care of, come to light in a transaction. And Suze, your choice here. We can take this from the pre-listing side, from the buyer got the inspection side, from both. Let's just walk through some dynamics here and we can touch on both sides of that equation.
Perfect. I mean, I think it's a good idea. We're going to talk about the pre-inspection. I think what we'll say is would a pre-inspection help? So let's just talk about there was no pre-inspection. So the buyer made an offer conditional on home inspection. They get this home inspection and they're not expecting it. I mean, maybe the agent said, well, the roof doesn't look great, but it seems fine. There hadn't been any rain for a while. So it just wasn't obvious. And the homeowner, just a nice couple. They're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. They've been there for a long time. It works for them. What do they know, right? That scenario. So, the complication here is that you're going to have some really significant emotions on both sides. So the seller, if they think their house is great, and then an inspector tells them it isn't, they're going to respond with disappointment or more likely shame. And shame is a very strong emotion that will cause them to behave in weird ways. They might become quite position oriented or defensive. Who knows, right? But things happen to them when they feel these strong emotions. So we've got a seller who's a little insulted by the inspection report. And then we've got a buyer, even if there was best intentions, they're now going, oh my gosh, this is going to be financially really challenging or ruinous for us. And we have to do all this work we don't know how to do. And we're disappointed. Our dream house isn't as dreamy as we hoped it would be. And then the agents can go about a couple of different ways. Some agents see this, really analyze Okay, what's the information? What's in the report? This is, number one for negotiations is what information do I have? And not responding emotionally to that information. What's in there? And what's it going to cost to rectify these things? And then being able to help the clients make really good decisions without emotions, rational decisions. So good agents who are really grounded in negotiation theory can do that. But some agents, they just want the deal a lot. Like they were really counting on that transaction. And now they can be quite emotional and maybe even a little bit upset with the inspection report. So there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of emotions potentially coming into the mix in what is relatively simple situation of a home inspection report that wasn't great.
Like, exactly. It's a bit of a bomb that's about to go off potentially, unless cooler heads prevail. So, in this situation, Suze, I'll just ask plainly, what's the agent to do? Where do you
So
take it from here?
yeah, so if I'm the, let's say, listing agent, I'm the listing agent. First of all, I think I've been negligent that I haven't done a pre-home inspection and already dealt with this reality with the sellers before the house went on the market. But let's say for whatever reason I didn't. I didn't believe in home inspections or I was in a rush, whatever. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to stay super level-headed and say, what information do I have, right? What's in the report, as I mentioned before, and what is the buyer's agent requesting? Are they requesting that the buyer walk away? Are they requesting that the seller remediate the deficiencies? Or are they looking for a negotiated settlement between those two extremes? Because I find that often agents jump to conclusions and start getting defensive about the situation without knowing what the buyers want. So that gathering of information before you even really approach the seller. And once you have that information, then you've got to approach the seller. And this is where you're managing emotions. You're keeping it very factual. You're keeping it, you're really just keeping it clear with clear options so that the seller can see a way through. Typically, if this seller is feeling cornered or shame, which is possible in this situation, they're going to immediately start to see the worst case scenario. The buyer's going to run and I'm never going to find another buyer. And if they go there, then they're going to be very hard to deal with. So quality of information, managing emotions, and delivering that information to the seller in a way that gives them some options and a strategy to move forward.
And what do you do if you're on for the sellers and it's your client that has that feeling of shame? How do you diffuse that and get them to see things from less of an emotional position?
Yeah, I think in this case I would just normalize it. I say that all the time to people. Oh my God, like your house is fine. You've been in it for 30 years. Of course it's used. My house is used too. Right? So it's just trying to normalize the reality. I was on a webinar this morning and I'm like, we've just got to start being really honest with people. If someone's house is in really bad condition, don't tell them it's in great condition so you can get the listing because you're going to end up in a scenario like this. Have the courage to be honest and give them choices. I think the big takeaway from this, from the seller's point of view, is what a huge benefit of pre-inspection. I'm not here to sell pre-inspections, you guys. I just believe in them because as a negotiation thought leader, information is power. And so a pre-listing in home inspection is information, which gives you power. And there's a prime example where this situation could have been avoided completely, either by disclosing these deficiencies to a buyer or getting them fixed before the inspection.
And Suze, buyers considering walking away, because that was a big fear point in what we just discussed, right? The sellers are afraid the buyers might walk away. Perhaps the agent's afraid they've put all this effort into trying to find this home, and now it may not be what the buyers want. They might walk away. So, how do you go about dealing with that? Because that's conjuring up a lot of fear and anxiety in a couple of the stakeholders.
For sure, and I hear this a lot. So, the big picture really is if you want to be a great agent for a really long period of time, is you always have to put your client's interests ahead of everything else. And I know we learn that in fiduciary agency duty through our Korea code, but it's deeply embedded, right? I mean, 40 years in this business, I get it. The agents who always put their client's interests above everything else have long-lasting, successful careers. So, I think you got to go in with that if it's the right thing for your buyer to walk, that you're going to support them in that. But in many cases, it's not. There's a solution, I would say in most cases, because the seller still wants to sell and the buyer still wants to buy. And now we've just got to close the gap on how we can problem solve the deficiencies between them. And that's the art of the negotiation, is being able to hold that together. The buyers may say they want to walk because they're spooked. And when we're spooked, we default to positional speaking. And the position is, I'm going to walk away. And that, it immediately resets everybody, sets everybody into chaos. And hear them say that, and then just say, hey, if you want to walk, I have your back 100%. We'll go find another house. But let's just go through all the possible scenarios first. Let's go through all the possibilities and see if there's a way to be able to get this house for you that works.
Yeah, this one is a really interesting example in terms of what you just said, because I look at the deficiencies. Now, we made up these examples, but the deficiencies are common, right? You've got a roof near end of life, you've got a furnace at end of life. That just means it's old, right? That's what that means, right? The thing has been around for a long time, it served its purpose, and it's almost time to replace. If you have a client, as an example, that's looking perhaps in a very established older part of a city or town, depending on where you live, this is going to be common. You're going to find older homes. Older homes that haven't had these upgrades are going to have these issues. So uh, there's a bit of big picture thinking that I agree with you comes into play here, where if your client's looking for this type of home, these aren't unexpected deficiencies. So perhaps some level setting, some expectation setting around that piece as well. I'd welcome your thoughts on that, Suze.
Yeah, I mean, if they're unexpected, I think in this scenario we had said, or so if they were expected, I think in this scenario we had said they were unexpected. But yeah, I mean, older homes are older homes. I mean, as soon as you have a buyer say, I really want a beautiful century home in this beautiful neighborhood, before you even look at houses, you want to have that expectation conversation about what that looks like, and what it means to buy a very old home or an older home, and the things that they're going to be up against for sure. Absolutely.
There's one other thing that I want to raise in regard to this scenario, based on a conversation you and I were having in advance of today's session. So, in this case, it sounded like buyer and seller wanted to come to the table, negotiate through these items, and come to resolution, which is a great outcome, and it happens regularly. You were sharing an example where there was some deficiencies in a home. This was a real life example brought forward by a realtor. There were some deficiencies in the home, and the buyer's agent rightfully went to seller's agent and said, what are we going to do about this? And seller's agent said, well, the clients are at their limits financially. They're not going to be able to do anything to support financially bridging this gap. And the buyer's client said, the buyer themselves said, it's okay, we'll deal with it. But the agent felt very guilty about not driving through some negotiation, some betterment for their client because of these deficiencies. So I thought this would be a good example in which we could look at that one. What do you do where the clients say, yeah, we're fine, we're at agreement, but you as the agent say, wait a minute, that doesn't quite feel fair, or I feel like I haven't done my job completely to the requirements, I haven't discharged my duty here. What do you do then?
Oh, this is one of my favorite subjects. And this email came in from someone in my circle, so I don't mind kind of blowing it up. They're used to that with me. It's not your negotiation. It's never your negotiation. It's your client's negotiation, and you're there as the consultant. So, if they want to go ahead, your fiduciary agency duty says you help them go ahead. If they want to overpay for a property, you help them overpay for a property. But that doesn't mean that we just do it blindly, because they're trusting us to give them counsel. So in this situation, once you've exhausted the idea that you'll be able to get any movement from the seller, then it really is a choice of whether the buyer wants to, go hardball on trying to renegotiate, walk away, or buy the house. And if the buyer says, look, these things are whatever, X number of dollars, we don't have really a problem with that. We like the sellers, we want the house, just go. Your duty as an agent is to do that. Like, it's not even an emotional thing. Your legal responsibility is to do that. But even ethically, guys, that's what they've done. I've bought houses that I overpaid for, bought houses that my agent didn't think I should, that worked out incredibly well. So, you let the client do what they want, and you just let them know your opinion. Hey, listen, these things are going to cost X number of dollars. That's a lot of money. Are you sure? And they go, yeah, we're sure. And then you just go ahead and you do what you're instructed to do.
Not great.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this scenario, we have a relatively happy outcome, reasonable people. We're going to assume that they've come to an agreement, put the emotion aside, come to an agreement, and they're moving ahead with their transaction. But let's look at one that is a little bit different. Our scenario two is around using the home inspection report as leverage, which uh, I'm hearing more and more about. Market timing, right? Sign of the times in the market, so to speak, that this is something that is being used more as leverage. We talked a little earlier on in the session that there's no such thing as a perfect house, right? They don't exist, and inspections are not pass fail. However, they do create some points of leverage. So let's look at this idea. Uh, there's an inspection. It comes forward with some deficiencies, like any house would have. They're minor. Sellers negotiating in good faith, buyers taking the position and having the belief that the report is giving them full leverage, right? Carte blanche to go in there and renegotiate. Inspector has done a reasonable, neutral job. Nothing seems to be offside there. Agents, for good reason, want to hold the deal together. So, Suze, walk us through what's happening here.
So, power in a negotiation, right? It's everything, and we study it deeply in the Aryan course because it's so critical to the first and primary negotiation and to the renegotiation. As I said earlier, the minute that there's a condition on home inspection, a significant if that home condition is worded loosely, and I think we should change how we word the home inspection. I have lots of opinions, and people push back against me, and that's all good. I can see it in the chat. I'm cool with that. Email me, we'll have the conversation. So I think we should tighten those clauses up so that they don't take so much power away from the seller. But as they're worded now, satisfactory in the buyer's opinion. So in other words, the buyer can walk away if there's like a chipped light plate, right? They can walk away basically on anything. So they do have a lot of power once that condition's lined up, and they know it, or at least the ones who are savvy negotiators know it. And if they're aggressive, competitive people, they might decide to use that power advantage against the seller. And when that happens, we need to, not respond emotionally, because it's pretty typical in negotiations. And we're watching some pretty interesting negotiations on the world stage right now that are a lot worse than the negotiations that we might see in a home inspection renegotiation. So being able to see it through the negotiator's lens, understand what's going on with power, and then gather the information and see what you can do about rebalancing the power in that negotiation. These things really, really matter. And specifically in this situation where a buyer is using it as leverage.
And I see this as a lot of risk on the buy side because there's a big risk of overplaying that leverage from my perspective. I mean, if you're representing that buyer and you're making assurances that don't worry, we can get this price down, we can get some form of abatement through this process. That's not a guaranteed negotiation approach. So perhaps we could talk a
But
little bit about that risk and then how to mitigate and maybe what steps to take if you do want to use the report to negotiate. There's something valid there, but where's the
I
line? How do
think
you
there's
want
I
to do
think there's
this?
less risk than you think, right? Because if they go and they say, hey, we want money off, and they goes back and forth, and there's all this sort of conversation and talk and aggression or whatever it is, and the sellers finally go no, then the buyer can still waive the condition.
W-
Right? So there's not
Yes,
really, that's what's difficult about it, is that there's not really very much risk to the buyer, except the seller isn't going to like them. That's
that's
the risk.
yes. And we can let's pause on there for 1 second. Let's go back to the buyer's agent because I have heard some stories where buyer's agents are making some representations about how much further they can get ahead in the deal
Mm.
with what sort of deal could be struck on the basis of the inspection. And that is up to the buyers, right, and the sellers. If they can come to an agreement around that, absolutely. But if they can't, to your point, if the buyer tries and the seller says, no, we're not going to reduce the price here, then the buyer has a choice to make about whether or not they proceed with that transaction. I think it's an interesting approach from the side of the agent. Um, Absolutely, there can be some movement and there can be some negotiation, but the outcome of a negotiation is never guaranteed.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Never guaranteed. I hear you. So we've got what you're saying is there's an agent who's decided to activate this competitive behavior in this negotiation, not necessarily the buyer.
Sometimes, and I've heard about it being used more often. I'd be interesting in the open part of the session to hear how many people are seeing this, if they are seeing this, if they're seeing that agents are taking positions that are a bit more aggressive than that they would it might have taken historically on using this more of a sword than a shield. I would
Yeah.
position it as that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things in the text. I can't keep totally up with the text, you guys know. So I mean, if a lot of how effectively this will be how much power the seller has. So we're talking about power balance, right? So the buyer has additional power because of the condition. And now they're either the agent is activating, leveraging that power to advantage, or the buyer is activating or together. And then will that or not be effective? And so analyzing the power that the seller has, and so that's where we get into BATNA, if you've heard about sort of the plan B or the fallback position power. So if there's other buyers in the market, the seller has more power, and they can say, as someone said in the text or in the chat box, they could, tell them to piss off. So it, the power balance is what matters. If there's no other buyers and the seller is under duress and there haven't been any other showings and there's no other buyers showing interest and the buyer does that, obviously the likelihood of getting that money off is higher. But here's the problem that you've got to think about, right? So if this trust is broken between the buyer and seller. So I would say to my buyer in that situation, again, remember, these are minor deficiencies that were expected. So this is not anything else. This is like normal wear and tear that the buyer's trying to use against the seller. If it was my client and it was unreasonable, I'd say, hey guys, of course I'll represent you. If you want to do this fiduciary agency duty, I will do it. But there's some risks to this for you. And they go, what? There's no risk. I can, and you go, well, the seller won't like you, right? So if there's any other problems that come up between now and closing, you're not going to get very much cooperation. But worse than that, they've lived in this house for 30 years and they're going to tell all their neighbor friends what a jerk you are. Are you sure you want to do this? So there's still a risk, even though it might not be just limited to the transaction. But ultimately, if there's a power imbalance and your client wants to use it to their advantage as a real estate license with fiduciary agency duty to that buyer, you need to give it a go.
That's the great advice there. We had talked about in terms of this one, positional versus principled negotiation. So do you want to talk a little bit about what that is and how it plays into this?
Yeah, so positional in our courses, we call it competitive because that's sort of what Harvard and Yale use, just so that's where I've done my studying. So positional bargaining or competitive bargaining. This is what I want. I want to win. I want to win at all expense. I don't really care about you or your needs or whether you win. And I'll do whatever I have to do to get that win. Versus principled negotiation is everybody has to have their needs met. We need to stay within the ethical confines of truth and honesty and fairness to be able to come to an agreeable that's mutually acceptable to all. In real estate, we call this collaborative negotiation in our courses. And so principled or collaborative negotiations tend to have a better outcome in real estate because you're dealing with human beings, identity, emotion, homes, right? We're not dealing with, a field of grain or a truck full of potash. So it tends to be, but that doesn't mean that there's not positional or competitive bargaining happening in residential real estate. You've got to understand it because it's happening and you need to be able to integrate with it. And so that you can still protect your client and get a good outcome.
That's really helpful explanation. There's one other thing I wanted to raise in terms of this one. the misuse of power. So we've talked about how this is a strategy that people may come across, that it is happening in residential real estate. It may have longer term consequences. There is some risk associated with it, but that there is a power dynamic at play. What if you, as agent, feel like you're really up against a misuse of power, almost an abuse of power? Like this is beyond the regular scope of negotiations. How do you deal with that?
Well, here's the beautiful thing, we can all say, oh God, the code of ethics and the code of, how we're supposed to conduct ourselves and all these rules and everything that all the organization really have. That's it's perfect because we have those things so that it gives us the exact answer to this. If at any point a client asks you to do something that violates your career code of ethics, you just don't do it at all. Your license is worth infinitely more than any one breach of the career code of ethics. And so I think it makes it a really easy decision. And I just think, you need to know the difference. You need to know the difference between when is power abusive and when is it outside. I call it coloring inside the lines. But you need to know the lines if you're going to color inside them. So you need to know your code of ethics. You need to know your protocols. You need to know your rules. And yeah, you should go right up to them, because that's often where the opportunities are. But you got to know where they are because you can't ever go over them because those are career destroying things. And no commission is ever worth that.
Sage advice, certainly. Okay, now let's move to scenario three, which I would suggest is our stickiest scenario. This is the one where hidden deficiencies are then, after the fact, revealed. Let's take so you've gone through, you've seen this house, you've probably seen this house a couple of times, you've put together the offer. We're going to go ahead and get this inspection done, and the inspection, on one hand, this is good news, has revealed some deficiencies that were previously hidden. Our example today, wet basement. Maybe it's raining on inspection day. So this one becomes evident where if you went to go see the house prior and it wasn't raining for several days, you might not have indicia of wet basement, right? And there's some areas that you can have some long-standing impact, like if it's, the smell can sometimes tip you off. But if it's really dry, it can be hard to tell. And concealment of things because of personal belongings. This happens all the time. Our inspectors run into this. But let's say when you went to go see the house, you couldn't see because a lot of things in the basement were covered with storage, right? People keep their junk in the basement. But by the time you get to the inspection, they started clearing out. And a big foundation crack was behind some stored items. And that shows up on the inspection report. So now here's another bomb we've just dropped into a transaction. Suze, why don't you talk us through the dynamics on this one? All of a sudden, you've got buyers that say they didn't tell us, they were hiding things, and they're up in arms, and trust is broken at this point.
These are super complex and we get them. Everybody here knows, right? We've seen it. We've all had our experience where we had either one of our clients or a client that we were buying or selling on the other side conceal something. Happens, unfortunately, and it's a real thing. And it's really why we want to get home inspection reports if we possibly can. Like, I mean, sometimes when there's multiple offers, it's hard, but it's risky because people are pretty good at concealing things. And so, what happens here is you've got an immediate breach of trust and breach of value. So if I was the buyer's agent, I would be deeply offended by this ethical breach of the seller, right? And so that's very emotional. The buyer probably also has some sort of a visceral reaction because human beings have reaction to fairness issues that are significant. Listing agent, we want to find out, if I'm the buyer's agent, I want to know if the listing agent knew about this or not, and they won't tell you. You kind of got to be in this really collaborative conversation to find out if they're on board or if this is just as surprising to them as it is to you. And then really you're moving forward now with a renegotiation, knowing that the seller is untrustworthy. Is the agent also untrustworthy is the question. And how badly does your buyer want this house under those circumstances? They may still really want this house. It might just be a house they love, even though the seller is not trustworthy. So you've got a lot of issues. This is where a strong agent with a great concept of negotiation theory can be really valuable to help manage the emotions of the buyer to make good decisions, help build a relationship with the listing agent who may or may not be in on this, and then protect everybody against the seller, who in this case is not trustworthy.
Lots
It's a
to
feisty one, right? This
there.
is a prickly one. It's a prickly
It's
one for sure.
it's difficult. So agents, they're managing risk, they're managing credibility, and they're managing emotion simultaneously in this one. So not an easy one. So okay, step one, how are we going to take down the temperature on this a bit? So how are we going to de-escalate from conflict into negotiation?
So a little meditation, right? When you first get the news, little self-management first. So you've got to be centered and calm. And that's really, we want to observe things and not experience them. That's our job as professional negotiators. We are not absorbing the emotions. We're just experiencing it, we're observing it, and then we're not absorbing it. So that's important. So you get a picture. I can't tell you how important it is to find out with the listing agents in on this. I can, really got one of this experience. I had an investor client who bought houses, renovated them, and sold them. And we had a home inspection done. So I'm the listing agent. And the inspector went in, and my client, the owner, had put new wiring in 6 inches and then met it up to the old knob and tube wiring in this house reno. And I had no idea. And when this was covered, I mean, on one hand, I'm like, what am I going to do here? I have fiduciary agency to my seller, except they're lying in something that's really important. And so being able to communicate with the buyer's agent carefully with legal advice that I didn't know about this, that I was not aware of this clearly, so that we can work on the same side. Because once you have that, then you've got a better situation. If you're the listing agent and this happens, I mean, get a legal opinion about what you're going to do because your fiduciary agency duty. But foundationally, you don't want to support someone who's burying or hiding a significant deficiency, because again, you're going to be in trouble and your license isn't worth it. So really establishing that relationship with the listing agent, and then being able to take all of that to the buyer and say, hey, thank gosh we have a home inspection report. We've got some choices. Let's sit down and really look at these choices and the pros and cons of the choices. So helping them just moderate and make a good decision. Obviously, accurate information, but what it would actually cost to fix that deficiency is important. So yeah, and I think this is where a really strong agent with great communication skills and negotiation skills can make a massive difference for everybody involved.
Yeah, completely agree with you on that one. What do you do when there's that gap between what you believe and you're seeing? So you're seeing that it looks like the seller's agent, maybe both, we're not trustworthy here. They may have been concealing some things. And the response you get is, we didn't know. We had no idea. We haven't gone down there in 3 months. This happens, right?
For
There's
sure.
facts for every single, potential outcome. The facts are always where it gets interesting. The outcomes tend to fall into certain buckets. So they tell you they really didn't know. We don't look down there. We didn't realize that there was any sort of water is a big one, right? Where, oh, we didn't know, we didn't see that repair has been there for so long. We didn't know why it was there in the first place. Just a lot of, we'll say, pleading of ignorance up to actual lack of knowledge of the problem. So how do you discern between that? How do you deal with that? Your buyer's coming in saying they're lying. You're trying to still get to an outcome that's going to make your client happy in the longer run.
Yeah, so, how do we know when people are lying? I mean, I have incredible intuition, and I know that agents in general who do their work to be present and knowledgeable have really good intuition on this. It doesn't mean you have to name it or label them that way, but you kind of know. And even if there's some doubt, like maybe they didn't know, you can't trust them. They are now an untrustworthy negotiation partner. It doesn't mean you can't negotiate with them, but they're untrustworthy. Again, we're seeing negotiations with parties that are untrustworthy on the world stage right now, right? So this is not like a weird thing. It's just like, okay, that person's untrustworthy. So you don't have to label them or believe them. You just know that there's misinformation and it was likely deliberate. So that's what you know, right? So the big thing is, what is in the best interest of your client? Because people who lie lie. So there's a very good chance that there's other things, right? That this is going to be a difficult person to deal with. But if they love the house, then you're dealing with that. And I would say personally to my buyers, this is, this person's untrustworthy. How badly do you want the house? And if they don't want the house that badly, then go find a better seller. But if they want the house, then you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to get an estimate. I would ask for more time on the home inspection. I would get an estimate on the repairs. I might ask the inspector to do a second walkthrough to just take a deeper look. Can I pay you more to go deeper? Just be sure. Whatever it takes to do your due diligence to eliminate the risk to the buyer in the situation where you don't feel like you can trust the seller.
So this
Because
isn't
sometimes you're
like,
going to still want the house, right? Like it might be a really great house.
I I would say that from our side of the fence, what we see is that regardless of what is in the inspection report, most times buyers want the house. It doesn't mean they always should. Doesn't mean that there aren't issues that should be deal breakers. And sometimes deals do break, absolutely, for lots of reasons. But we find people get emotionally tied to homes and they do want the home. Now, long term, will they feel happy that they made that decision? I think that's a lot of what the safeguarding is for, right? Down the road, will the buyer still have the same sentiment and have you done everything you can to ensure that you help them get to the decision that's going to make them happy long term and that you did everything you can to protect them in them making that decision? So, uh, lots there, but I don't want to lose sight of this trust and the idea that humans interpersonally, we'll often look at this concept of repairing, right? Repairing relationships where trust has failed, right? Forgiveness, things like that. Does that fit in anywhere here, Suze? Is there an opportunity here to repair if there's failed trust, or is that a bad idea and you need to then operate around the fact that this is not a trustworthy negotiation partner?
I think that depends on the situation. I mean, I wouldn't, someone who tried to hide a significant deficiency in a house, I wouldn't trust them. Wouldn't mean I wouldn't trust them if I met them 3 years later or something. But in this negotiation that they tried to take advantage of me in, no, I'm not going to trust them. Why would I? It doesn't mean I won't deal with them. It just means I won't trust them. So I'm going to put more effort into managing risk. Yeah, and I'm not there to fix people. I'm there to get a transaction done that's in the best interest of my client. That's it, right? I'm not there to fix people.
No, very good point. You're not teaching lessons, you're not fixing, you're trying to facilitate the transaction. And that's taking some of the emotion out of it as well as you spoke to earlier. Okay. We do want to make sure we have time for questions.
There's so many comments. I think
The time
questions are
is
going to be
flying
fast and
by.
furious. So
Yes.
I just, what I want to keep the questions to guys because everybody's going to have a story here. I know that. And I love realtor stories so much. I'm thinking about just starting a website for realtor stories. But let's keep it to questions that are going to, really help people make better decisions in the moment of what's happening, specifically in this situation, and try to keep the stories to a minimum, or else we'll be here all day, which would be fun, but most of us can't do that. I'll let you guys handle the Q&A.
Yeah, we don't want people missing the good part because we're at the top of the hour, right? So, Andrew, are you teed up and ready, or Suze, do you
Yeah,
want to give us 2 minutes of synthesis
we can
comments
go
here to
whenever.
wrap, and then we'll roll in? Andrew looks ready, so if you're ready, Suze, I'm
Always.
ready. Why don't you just start
Andrew's
hitting us
ready.
with fun stuff?
Andrew, do you want to pop the AREN course information in just in
Yeah,
case
that
people have
was
to
my next
run?
one. Yeah, I
That'd
still
be
want to
great.
interrupt when you were talking before. There was no like
Thank
simple
you. There was
pause.
no
Um,
opening.
Before we jump into the questions, for those interested, so Suze doesn't have to sell it herself right now, and someone else can say it. These are great courses, and she has one that happens to be starting tomorrow with only 4 spots left. So that's why we're putting that one first. So first four to get it. Otherwise, if you can't make tomorrow or you're not one of the first four, she also has one in March. So check them out. But yeah, so the first question, which is a relatively simple one, I assume you have different scenarios potentially for when you would or not. Um, as the buyer, would you share the inspection report with the seller?
Great question. So I can't imagine that a listing agent would allow a condition on inspection and not have that they get a copy of the inspection in it. So your clause as a listing agent should say that you get a copy of the home inspection. Because if you don't, the buyer has even more power because they can lie about what's in the report. So it's a power question though, as the buyer. So you're not under an obligation to share it if there's nothing in the offer. And so now it's your choice whether you share it or not. Will it give you more or less of a power advantage, right? If there's legitimate deficiencies that are significant, it gives you more power. If you're exaggerating those deficiencies, it gives you less power. So you get to decide whether you share it or not. But that is something I'd made a note of, is that if I was selling my house, I would not accept a condition on home inspection unless I was going to get a copy of that home inspection.
Awesome. So there's a question here from Ryan, and he just clarified one piece in the chat for me. He says he uses a 1% property inspection schedule in place of the standard clause. Have you used something like this before? And I had to follow up with them because I hadn't heard of a 1% property inspection schedule before. It was what I assumed, but I wanted to make sure. And it's a form that states the buyer is responsible for defects up to 1% of the purchase price. And he uses
Love
this
it.
form with his buyers too.
Ryan, let's make it standard across the Canadian industry. I mean, what we used to do was say that the seller had the option to remediate the deficiencies, but that opens a can of worms because, what's the quality of the remediation? But anything that takes the power away from the buyer and unnecessary. Like, I don't think we want the buyers buying houses that are in worse shape than they want. I don't think any of us want that. But we also don't want to hand this power grab to the buyers every single time we sell a house conditional. And that eliminates the power grab. It's brilliant. And we should all be doing that. Perfect. Thank you.
And there's another question here. The concerned about the trends of agents advertising the home has had a pre-list inspection. The report is not meant for buyers as they should get their own and so on. What are your thoughts?
Sure. If I was buying a house and the home inspection was there and I didn't trust the home inspection for some reason, I would get my own. That's fine. But the point is, there's not going to be anything unexpected. One of the things I would think is, people are going to give me pushback on always getting a home inspection on your listings. Of course they are, right? Because I didn't know about that. Alina, who's in my circle, she's wrote, I have stories. Of course we have stories, right? I still think it's a good idea, and I'm willing to, have that conversation with anybody at any time. But I definitely used to use, and this is not a pitch for Carson and Dunlop, this is real. I used Carson and Dunlop for seller inspections, pre-list inspections, because they had a better reputation than maybe, Joe Blow inspector, who might be awesome, whom I might use Joe Blow inspector for my buyers because they're great. But the credibility of that inspection matters. And yes, if you have any doubt about the quality of that inspection and you're representing buyers, get another home inspection done. I mean, they're relatively cheap compared to the value of the house and the value of repairs of these houses and we all know that.
There's a question there. How can we as realtors help inspectors to better define those issues that matter and those that don't?
That's probably not a negotiation thought leader question. So, that's interesting though. Like, what are you guys not getting from the inspector that you would like? Because I bet Karen would like to know that.
I was just going to say, I'm very interested in that. And this is why Carson Dunlop is very interested in ensuring we are a true partner to this community because this is the front line. And these are the people that are running into these problems in real time. So I would welcome that conversation. We're looking at doing that in a more formalized way. But for the person that asked that, I'd love to have an opportunity to have a chat because I'm very interested in what you have to say about that. And we're very interested in providing that level of partnership to the industry.
The other thing I'd thought about, Karen, is it'd be interesting to bring in and to make sure that the teaching is there for the inspectors about how to communicate with buyers and sellers. Sometimes their sort of engineer brain is abrupt in a situation that's quite sensitive. So I think that the inspection should be left alone. They should be awesome. They should be pure, but maybe communicated in a different way in some situations.
Yeah, it is really important that there is this impartiality to it, right? And that has to be preserved. But the communication as to what are we even talking about? Like when we talk about end of life, that's one of my favorite examples because even that, especially in a high stress situation, can be confusing. Like, what do we mean by that? And is it normal, so to speak? And I'm going to be very careful how I position things. That's not the language we use in the reports. But that is, if I put on my consumer hat, that's what I want to know. Did you find something that's abnormal here? Do I need to be concerned? Would other houses like this have this? So absolutely, I think as an industry, we have an obligation to improve how we communicate out. And there's some learnings from this side of the fence, from the realtors on that piece. So I welcome that conversation. Maybe a different session. Andrew, we'll talk
Absolutely.
about how we facilitate that. But I am
Yeah.
very, very open and welcoming to that conversation.
Sure, we can set something up. So the next one, it's not so much a question, but I've seen like 4 or 5 different variations of this between the Q&As, private messages, and the public messages, which is essentially the argument against pre-inspections is if you do find out things, then you have to disclose, which then I guess there is you can hurt your negotiating position, or the price on the home. So what is your kind of thought process around like, is there a risk to getting it when it comes to negotiating later?
Yeah, so I obviously hear this a lot, right? I talk to a lot of agents at a pretty high level. Like I say, I'm going to stick with I think you should get a pre-inspection done. I think if someone's trying to hide something, it chases it out and saves you a lot of hassle. The, they're likely in this market, not every time, but likely in this market, there's going to be a home inspection. It's more likely than not. So it's going to come up. Right. And so now you're into a nasty renegotiation. I mean, I'm actually thinking about putting my house in the market and I'm thinking 2 inspections. Get one now, then fix everything, and then get another one. Because a couple of $1,000s in the whole scheme of selling a house and trying to maximize your strategy is nothing. And it gives you information. If you want to go around and sell houses where you're not disclosing what's wrong with the house, I don't know. I just don't think that's a really nice way to do business, personally.
Yeah. And then just Ryan says he can send me the 1% property inspection schedule so I can include that in the follow-up email for those interested as a guide, still get independent legal advice. Um, but the other one here, oh, I just was pushing it in here, is as a listing agent, how and to whom do you share the pre-listing inspection?
So as a listing agent, how do you share it
So do you
to the
have the
public?
pre-list inspection and do you share that with people? Would your recommendation be to hold it back, but you're just using it for your own
Yeah.
information?
It's interesting, that's a really, really good question. A lot of the agents I consult with, so I call my business consulting as opposed to coaching because I really just help them with strategy and negotiations. And that comes up a lot. And I think it depends on the situation, depends on the house, what the deficiencies are, and whether the agent wants to be able to have a conversation about those deficiencies. So if it's a good inspection, post it, make it out there, go for it, I think, and depending on the property or the privacy issues of the seller. But if it's something that there's in there and you've had an estimate of what it's going to cost and it's all reasonable and fair and above board, but you want to keep it where you're presenting this in a conversation with the buyer's agent, then I think that's also a legitimate strategy depending on the situation. So really good question and something we spend a fair bit of time on building strategies around listing houses.
Awesome. Then we have a question from Jeff. Do you agree that the risk of having a deal completely collapse over a small item isn't understood well by buyers and sellers? This is a result of people leaving property inspections as late as possible before the condition date.
Yeah, so a complex question, and I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at, but we can address it anyway, right? One of the things that we didn't come up in one of our scenarios, Karen, is this idea of buyers just getting buyer's remorse and using it as an opportunity to walk away. And in this market and this environment, we have a fragile market, we have a fragile economy, we got a lot of weird news. Buyer's remorse is a very real thing, and it wouldn't take much in some cases for the buyer just to go, nah, I'm out. Buyer's remorse is very real, and helping everybody know that, the agents too. And yes, yes, I mean, if it's a legitimate transaction, get the inspection done as soon as you can so that there is a day or two of breathing room. Because as a buyer's agent, I might want to spend some time with my buyer assessing whether they should go ahead or not. I think it's a really good recommendation.
Okay. Also, you had sent me a link about you had a tool which we didn't address today, the Frankel pause. I'll put
Oh,
the
I
link in
just
the
made this
chat, but
tool
you
for you guys. I just wanted to give you guys a new tool. So it's called the Frankel Pause. So Viktor Frankl was the psychologist who spent time in Auschwitz and then came out and really changed the world with what he had learned through that experience because he could find happiness even in that crazy place. So a really powerful story. But his famous quote, and you guys probably know it, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. I think this is really important in all real estate negotiations, but particularly what can be heated around renegotiations. And so the tool, I think Andrew's putting a link into it there. is just a one-page thing with a bunch of questions for you to ask yourself while you're having what can sometimes be challenging or intense conversations to be able to balance out and really be responsive instead of reactive, because that's what high-level negotiators do. We're here to help people make really hard decisions in really kind of amplified situations. So yeah, there's the tool. I would, just a way for you guys to get something to take away today.
Awesome. So if you want to, learn more about Carson Dunlop, book an inspection, carsondunlop.com. Pretty straightforward. They got a brand new website. You can go check that out. But I appreciate everyone coming. So what we're going to do now, I will get the recording process. We had a bit of a pre-thing, so I got to cut that out of the recording. We'll upload that, and then we will send that out to everybody. And I'll include the links that we've talked about here. I'm going to try and get this out tonight because I know, Suze, your course is starting tomorrow. So just want to make sure people have the opportunity there. And I'll put the link to basically everything that we shared here today in it. And then Ryan was also going to share the 1% clause that he uses, and I'll include that in the follow-up email as well. And then, yeah, let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see, whether home inspection related or really any topic. We are open to creating content around. But I'll give each of you guys one last chance. So if people want to, reach out, learn more, what's the best way for them to do it? And we'll start with Karen.
Sure. If you want to book an inspection with Carson Dunlop, it's very easy. carsondunlop.com. You can book us right off the website. Thanks for having me, Andrew. And thank you, Suze. This was so valuable.
It's super fun, Karen. Thank you. So a lot of you already taken my courses. Take some more, check in, push back about the things I've said, engage. That's all I want. Andrew, can you put that link to that tool up? A couple of
Yeah, I
people
put
asked
it
for it.
a couple times. I'll throw
Oh,
it up
okay.
again. Then
Anyway,
we'll
it'll be
include
in
it
the
in the
follow-up
follow-up.
email, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, feel free, you guys, if you really disagree with me, I'm all game for the conversation. And Andrew, thank you for doing this. You're bringing, you're bringing what I've been trying to bring for years, this higher level of education to real estate so we can get the consumer's trust back. And thank you so much for doing it.
And thanks for joining. It's been fun. Like I said, I like to just bring smart people in and get out of the way. It's the best way to do it. So thank you, everyone. We'll send out the report or the replay and all that either again later today or first thing tomorrow morning. As always, if you have questions. Otherwise, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Suze, for coming in. And this was great.
Awesome, guys. Thanks so much.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.